Okay, fantastic. So again, welcome back to Geography 480, CBS 670. We've been spending a bit of time this week talking about, cartographic design principles and maps and such. I've popped up this map. This was actually created by a student last semester in the advanced GIS class as part of a geovisualization exercise we were working on. And Anahea Robbins, she's actually a TCBS student. But she made a series of these maps for the different islands. There's some really kind of nice stylistic elements to these. I'm only showing the one from Hawaii Island right here, but in each of them, she had kind of a very faint, background image she created with a representative plant. And so for Hawaii Island, it was the lehua blossoms. She's got, proper diacritical marks on talking about the moku, and faintly showing some information about the aupua'a. So, this is a simple map, right? There's not a lot going on in this map. But it as a map series, it is really, nice to convey. And I could see this in, middle school or elementary school curriculum or such, posters on the walls, this kind of thing. So the maps don't have to be super, complicated to be effective, as long as it's, they're clear about what they're trying to convey. And so, this is a sort of a nice example of what she put together. There were some issues she was having with her, some of the font, the A's and the U here, you can see it's slightly different, but aside from that, I think it just couldn't handle the additional diacritical marks. But aside from that, quite nice. On the other hand, there's this map, right? So this is a map that I had you guys work on for the map critique, and there's more information on this map. I don't know if the information here is presented in a useful way. I don't think it is presented in a useful way. And so, one of the things that, at least down in the legend is talking about, Hawaii Island moku, the moku are depicted by color, right? There's no labels or anything, but, color can be an effective way without cluttering things up. It says ISO high at 500 meters, and then comma rainfall. So it's confusing, and you guys picked up on this, that it was confusing. Just so we're all on the same page, if you didn't already look this up or didn't know the term, an ISO high at, it's a line drawn on a map connecting points that receive equal amounts of rainfall, right? So presume it's kind of like a contour line for elevation, except it's for rainfall. So if you were to walk along one of those lines, presumably you would be at the same amount of rainfall, right? The problem, or one of the problems with this map is all of the ISO high lines are the same color, right? And so that's not really helpful, right? So, I don't know if you guys can see my cursor, but we know some things about, but what's the difference between this ISO high line and this ISO high line, or this ISO high line over here and this one over here, right? There's no label, there's no color, there's no discrimination between the different lines. They exist, okay, right? But is not really helping us. But again, it kind of depends on what the purpose of this map is. I can't imagine that the purpose of the map is to show where ISO high lines are, but not convey anything about the amount of rainfall that these different places are getting. The stations, similarly, if the purpose is to show the distribution of the stations, it's totally fine if they're all the same color. If the purpose is to show something else, like, how much rainfall those different stations get, well, all the same color is not going to be that helpful. So there's a number of issues that you guys, picked up on this map, and I just wanted to share, kind of the big ones, at least that I see. But again, we had this map critique exercise, and I asked you guys some different questions. What do you think is the overall purpose of the map? What is it trying to convey, and is it successful? And so, rainfall, right? Rainfall, and it's unclear. The legend doesn't describe what's representing. The map is not showing how much rainfall there is, but rather the areas of rainfall. So a lot of things that I just, encapsulated you know, you guys were picking up on. It's confusing, and it's confusing what they're showing for the different points and such. And again, I think that those same issues are at play here if we look at this guy again. This next question, is the map legible? You know, what could be improved, if anything? So legibility, you know, can you see what's on here? You know, easy to read, but hard to understand what the map is representing. I thought that was probably the most kind of, you know, pithy, succinct comment. Like, yeah, this map, it's, you know, the legend text could be a little bit bigger. But in general, it is pretty easy to read, even with my old eyes. But it's hard to understand what it's actually showing, right? Of any sort of use. These folks identify the diacriticals are incorrect. You know, I've never seen this before, actually. That KAU is KAY umlaut U umlaut. I've never seen that before. It's very interesting. There's typos. The title should be at the top. But these critiques are not really, you know, legibility critiques. These critiques are more about, you know, composition and map elements and such, right? Again, I think it's legible. It's just, you know, not really conveying things in an effective way. You know, there's spelling mistakes. The ISO highlight lines need to be labeled. Yeah. And then a suggestion about the title. And then the top 3 problems identified with the maps. The dots just don't make sense. And I'm not giving everybody's comments. I'm just doing some selected, you know. So if your comments aren't shown, it's okay. It doesn't mean you had bad comments. I just didn't grab everybody. Color scheme could be improved. The Aukwala lines are distracting and cluttering. Are there Aukwala lines on here? Yes, there are. But yeah, they're not labeled, right? So it's these faint black lines in the background. And yeah, they're not included in the label. So you know, someone who's not from Hawaii would not know what's going on with those different faint black lines. It's not specific. The color scheme is not appealing. The title and scale need to be included. Be difficult to read for red, green, colorblind people. An accurate description of data, cluttered and unidentifiable with them. So yeah, you guys, you didn't hold back on your comments about this map. Like for the red, green, colorblind issue, I mean, the fact that they're all green lines and they're all red dots and they are dots and they are lines. You know, if you weren't able to discriminate between the colors of the red dots and the colors of the green lines as shown here, I don't think it actually matters because there's actually no information in the colors, you know? So this is a weird case that the map is, you know, somewhat poorly designed such that even if you were red, green colorblind, you wouldn't have any less, you know, you'd still be confused, right? You'd be as confused as a person who wasn't red, green colorblind. I don't know if that's something in the favor of this poor map composition, but regardless, okay. And so, you know, can we improve this? Can we improve this map? Yes, I think we definitely, you know, can improve this map. Before I talk about that a little bit, is there anybody that has any additional sort of thoughts or comments about the map that haven't really conveyed so far in terms of any additional thoughts or comments or critiques? You're welcome to, you know, put in the chat or just call out. Just want to give it. Yes.
Is it necessary to have an inset map?
So again, it depends on the audience, right? So an inset map definitely could be included here. There's plenty of, you know, open space, and so I could imagine in the, you know, in the upper, you know, corner here, upper right hand corner here, you could have an inset map showing, you know, like the Hawaiian Island chain, right? Or you could have its the position of Hawaii Island within the larger Pacific. So it kind of depends on what your audience is and how familiar they are with, you know, the area. So if this was a working map for like Hawaii County or Hawaii DLNR, folks to talk about, rainfall and such, you probably wouldn't need an inset map, right? Because the people are so comfortable and familiar with the island. But if this was you're presenting this map at an international conference or something, and there's going to be people from Lithuania there, like they're not going to know, where this is in the world. And so in that case, it would make sense. So if there's question about, who's going to see this, it's maybe always good to, yes, include an insert map to sort of give that context. And a number of you guys mentioned about the, missing scale bar. This is a situation where I think it would be very helpful to have a scale bar. Just as a quick ready way of getting at distances between some of these stations and such. So that's a great question about the inset map. So it depends on your audience and the composition, and if you can arrange it to include an inset map, in general, why not? Unless the people who are so familiar with it that the inset map is not needed, and then that would take up valuable real estate that you could use for other purposes. Fantastic question. Other questions or comments or observations?
Do you think that there's like too many contour lines? Like some maps have like skip a few contour lines, just like make them really dim in the background, and then they'll have like labels of like 500 and 1,000 or something like that.
Yeah. So again, it gets into sort of the cluttered and complexity. And so again, what's shown here is all contour lines from whatever the data set. And we're actually going to dig into the data used potentially to generate this this map in just a second. But yeah, your ways, if you look at USGS contour topographic maps, for example, yes, they'll do exactly what was suggested, is that some of the every 500 meters or such, they'll bold those lines, and then the intermediate lines, maybe they're on a 20-foot contour or something, those guys will be more faint. So there's a lot of different elements that you could take, but at the very least, labeling these lines, right, or labeling occasional lines, sort of key lines in here, that might be a helpful way to do it. With the absence of labeling or the absence of any kind of color scheme, showing the values of these contour lines, in these cases, these isohyet lines, it's all it is adding clutter. It's not really helping us, right? It's not really helping us. But yeah, that's a way to reduce some of the visual clutter. And you could, this sort of field ground idea, the key lines could be bolder and more vivid colors, or a more dark black, and then the intermediate lines could be a much lighter kind of gray color, which, right, or they would still be there, but they would fade into the background a bit. Okay. Very good. All right. So in terms of potentially improving the map, I wanted to, and this is another opportunity to talk a little bit about data and getting data and these kinds of things. If you're not familiar, and you may not be, but there's a really fantastic resource, the rainfall, if I could spell, the Rainfall Atlas of Hawaii, and it's out of the geography department at UH Manoa. John Price in our department here at UH Hilo was part of this, and some really great things, including an interactive map. You have to agree that you're not going to sue them if you use the data. So this is an interactive web-based map. You can click anywhere in the map, and it'll give you information about mean monthly rainfall. We can click over here on a Kona side and see much lighter and such. So fantastic. But you can also download the data associated with this guy, including some things just like maps, right? But also the GIS layers themselves, including isohyets, right? And you can get metadata about the isohyets. Here, what is this information? So Tom John Beluga generated this, and what do you get? You get 13 shapefiles, 1 annual and 12 monthly isohyets of the mean rainfall, either in inches or millimeters, all this great stuff. You can also get the rain gauge stations, okay? And I actually went ahead and if I can find these guys, I actually went ahead and downloaded these guys from this site. I already went ahead, I did that, and then I unzipped them, including the metadata to tell me about the isohyets. And I brought these guys into ARC. And so then now it's not exactly the same isohyets as was shown in the map critique exercise, but because maybe I chose millimeters and the other one was in inches, or I'm not exactly sure. But what's shown here is sort of annual isohyets in millimeters for Big Island, and what's shown are the stations. Now this one looks, fairly similar to this. Again, there's the clutter, there's more isohyet lines on here, so it's slightly different baseline data, but the general idea of, all green isohyet lines and then red stations, that's what we're seeing here. I don't have the MOCU on here, but I'm focusing more on the isohyet guys here. If you open up the attribute table for these guys, what you'll see are the actual included in here are the actual isohyet lines, right? So these values here, this is in millimeters per year, right? And so we can depict these different ways. And so if I right click on here and I go to symbology, instead of choosing a single symbol, I can choose graduated colors. And right away, we're starting to see some differences in here. I don't really like this for rainfall. Usually I think, sort of, blues and things are wetter. So we can kind of, change this out a little bit. I might choose something like this, but then I might invert it. Something like that, right? And so at the very least, now these lines are actually providing some context and meaning for us, right? We know that, and again, this could be improved. The lines could be thicker. We could, make them all blue. We could do different things, but in general, what we're seeing here at least is the fact that, East Hawaii, the wettest, and then as we sort of move over, we get more and more dry. And again, that information is completely missing from here, right? And so you could do similar work with the stations, right? There's information here in the stations that, again, in these, you could, if you scroll over, you can see all this stuff about, so this is average rainfall in January in inches, and up to, the annual average rainfall in inches and such. And you could plot the data that way, so that the stations, may be helpful rather than, but again, it depends. If you're just trying to show where are the stations located, red dots may be fine, right? But if you're trying to show some information about those stations, again, I can change this, right? So we could go to symbology, and instead of single symbol, again, we could do graduated colors. We could, change it to, the size of them is based. Let's do that. We're going to do proportional symbols, and we're going to do the basis on, let's say, annual average in millimeters. Is that helpful? I don't know if that's the most helpful way to do it, but at least there's some more information being shared here than what's being seen here. That's just kind of the point I wanted to get across. Okay, so with that, I wanted to introduce the lab a little bit. Lab2, mapmaker, make me a map. And so this lab should be open for you guys today. This is a lab where there's a difference between the work the graduate students will do and the work the undergraduate students will do. Although if you are an ambitious undergraduate, you are totally welcome to attempt the graduate portion of it. And if this is true for all these labs, if you're an undergraduate and you try the graduate part and you burn and you crash, it just doesn't go that way, those points will never count against you, right? It'll be as if you didn't ever attempt it, right? So your grade can never go down because you tried the grad thing and you just weren't able to make it. But it can sort of potentially help you. A note in La Lima and the grading scheme. because of a quirk in La Lima, I have to put in the max possible grades. And so if you're an undergraduate, you're going to see your points out of 120. If you're an undergraduate and you don't attempt the graduate part, your true grade is going to be out of 100, right? But you're like La Lima calculation, let's say you get a 98, right? You really got a 98 out of 100. But the La Lima thing, because of the limitations of the software, it'll show your percentage as 98 out of 120. So it's like a false inflation. So for you undergraduates, I'm just letting you know that ahead of time. Happy to talk about that again. But if you see your percentages in La Lima calculating, you're like, oh, I'm doing terribly. It's probably not. It's because it has to do with this max value. Let me bring this guy over again a little bit and talk about this. So you're gonna submit a couple of PDF documents of your completed maps, and those maps are going to be generated two ways. The first is I'm asking you guys to run through chapter 10 in your textbook and basically work through those exercises. And so it's basically, you're using this guy to make a nice looking map, and chapter 10 is a lot of exercises to help you do that. The data you'll use for those exercises, you've already downloaded. So those data already exist in this GTKAG Pro folder you already downloaded and unzipped. So those data already exist, okay? So you don't need to re-download stuff. But you do need your textbook for this, in this chapter 10, part 1. And at the end of it, you're going to export a layout to a PDF file. That PDF file you generate from exercise chapter 10, you're going to submit that as part of your lab write-up. You don't need to do the additional things after exporting a layout to PDF file. You don't need to package and share a project template in ArcGIS Online if you don't want to. Okay, so that chapter 10 should give you a really solid foundation in making nice maps and layouts and inserting all these different things, building on what you guys have already done in lab 1. Part 2 is where you then go out into the wilds on your own using whatever data set you're interested in. You can use data from the State of Hawaii Office of Planning. You can use data from, the Iceland National GIS Network, whatever you want, Chicago, doesn't matter to me, right? You just need to end up with a very well composed, nice looking map that you're going to, again, generate a PDF for it, formatted to fit on an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, and again, exported as a PDF file. And along with your PDF map, you're going to submit a well-crafted write-up, at least 3/4 of a page, that explains the following: the data used to make the map, where did it come from, what are the data layers, who the intended audience is, what their needs are, what you're trying to accomplish and why. So like, what is the message of the map? What's the thing that you're trying to convey to the reader? And any design choices you made to reach those goals. Okay. And how this assignment is going to be graded is basically, 10% of the assignment is coming from your PDF map you generate from the chapter 10 work you work through. And then the rest of it is from your submitted original PDF map and the write-up. So I will evaluate, how well did you, based on the write-up and map, understand and meet the user requirements, your visual hierarchy, your simplicity, legibility, consistency, use of color, composition, and then your written explanation. Okay, so that's for everybody, that's what needs to happen. So the PDF from the chapter 10 exercises, and then a PDF you make of a map you make yourself, original, beautiful map, along with a write-up explaining what you're doing in that map. And then for graduates and ambitious undergraduates, I'm asking you guys to find and read a recent peer-reviewed journal article of interest to you. Can be from ecology, marine science, anthropology, whatever, right? That's interesting to you, 2020 or later, that includes a map, right? A peer-reviewed journal article that includes a map as one of the figures. Then I want you to, give a brief overview of the paper and a more detailed summary and critique of the map figure itself. Okay, using these same points of criteria shown as above, consistency, use of color, all these different things. And then I also please include just a screenshot of the map itself, so I know what you were talking about, so that I'm able to help evaluate. And that's the lab. Okay, so that's the lab. It's due on the 7th. Hopefully, it should be pretty straightforward. I'm gonna stop sharing. I'm gonna stop.